So welcome everyone. Thank you for being here today in the Meyer Theater of the Grand Rapids Public Museum. My name is Dale Robertson. I serve as president of this institution, and my role today is to do a brief welcome. I am trained as a lawyer though, so sometimes saying your name in 15 minutes is tough, but I will try to keep it brief because you're here to hear from a panel about an exhibit that we were very pleased and honored to be the inaugural host of an exhibit being created and then will travel throughout the nation by the Jim Crow Museum at Ferris State University. So why us? Well, what we do here in the museum is we do present facts, what we call provenance, and then we all get to interpret. So I'll give you my interpretation. 2 public institutions on the west side of the state, educational at our core, Ferris State clearly higher education, but we ourselves are an educational institution. And so it seems fitting and proper that we would collaborate on this. We feel honored that we were the first one that we were asked to be the inaugural host and place for this exhibition. But also as educational institutions, that means we're learning institutions too. And I'd like to think that we've exchanged some learning. We certainly here have benefited by the partnership and the time that Dr. Pilgrim has spent with us and our staffs and folks that we have here to see the entire operation. But I also think that perhaps we've made some contributions too through the talent of our exhibits department that had to do the layout and the lighting and the whole arrangements and the wall, and that hopefully will be helpful as you travel further. And just the collaboration even that occurred, and that thing that happens when educators get together. I'm married to a teacher, so I know how things exchange and a bigger whole is created. And I want to give credit to my colleague, I'll introduce in a minute here, Mary Beth Jelks, for suggesting, well, how about overcoming hateful things? Right? So we frame it with that learning, but the aspiration and those lessons that you take with us after you leave. I mean, it's really been fulfilling. And I thank you for that, and I appreciate your choosing us. So now to officially kick off the panel and to introduce, please allow me to present my colleague, Vice President of Human Resources and Legal Counsel for the Grand Rapids Public Museum, Mary Beth Jelks.
Thank you, Dale. I'm a lawyer too, but I can say my name pretty quickly, so that may be a deficit of Dale's. I want to say this. This exhibit has been phenomenal. We have had so many different reactions and learning opportunities through this special exhibit. It really has surprised some people at how well this exhibit was received, especially in these times of contentiousness, But people have come out crying, asking questions. I know this factually because I served as a volunteer docent a couple times. People have come out with questions. People have come out indicating that information they never learned, they learned for the first time. Some people had information that growing up that they had in classes and stuff, maybe from their home or whatever, was misinformation. So the learning opportunity of this exhibit has been nothing short of phenomenal. But that's not why I'm here. I'm here to introduce the person who really is responsible for the collection. I checked around, some people call David Maverick. I'm sure some of his students, because my husband's a professor, and I know they talk about him behind his back. They call him a crazy professor and other things. I know that he is definitely the most tenacious person that I think academia has in the profession. But one thing, compliment my husband did that has always stuck with me with David when we first went up to see the Jim Crow Museum up at Ferris State is he said, David is really like a Renaissance man because he found a way through his own passion to present an exhibit that changes the paradigm of the discussion and that tells history not only with words but with powerful imagery. So I think that's a really great way to segue to David Pilgrim, who you all know is really responsible for like 30 plus years of collections. He may not have envisioned it as a museum at the time of collections, but it is a profound mission and passion that has brought it to full fruition in this awesome exhibit that will be a legacy piece, not only for Ferris State University, not only for David, but for the state of Michigan and for the country. Without further ado, I'm introducing David Pilgrim, who will introduce the illustrious panel we have. Thank you, David.
Thank you. So want to thank each of you for coming out. You could be at home watching preseason football. The games don't count, but they still hit. There are lots of things you could be doing today, but instead you're here with us, and we really appreciate that. I'm also thankful to the Wege Foundation for partnering with us. Obviously, the Grand Rapids Public Museum. I've had a wonderful opportunity to get to know their staff better. They were already good people, I just didn't know it. And having an opportunity for them to work with us has just been wonderful. I'd like to thank Jim Haverman here, who sponsored the room, which is good. Also want to thank Ferris State University. Sometimes I forget to say thank you to Ferris. The Jim Crow Museum would not be possible at, I would say, most institutions in this country. But it is possible at Ferris, in part because of our heritage, our founder, Woodbridge Ferris, but also because of the leadership there. And so I'm very thankful for that. Before I introduce our guests, I did want to tell you briefly. I have my notes, by the way, in case I don't forget anything. So I won't forget anything. Every time I give a talk or I'm part of a panel, there's a part of me that thinks no one's going to show up. And I remember years ago, I gave a talk in Brighton, Michigan. And the radio host told the people, don't show up. He's a troublemaker. It was a different introduction than the one Mary Beth just gave. So a lot of the times when that happens, a lot of people show up because they think, oh, this is going to be entertaining or something. And on that day, one guy showed up. That poor fella. I gave the same talk I would have given in front of 10,000 people, except there was only one guy there. And he got it all. I was sweating like Jesse Jackson. And it's okay to laugh when I say stuff. And so I'm glad to see as many people come out as did. So I want to start by having the panelists tell us who they are and maybe tell us why they agreed to be on this panel. And we'll start like that. Turn to my colleague and my boss, colleague and friend, Dr. Bill Pink.
Good afternoon. Oh, no. Good afternoon. Don't do that to us. This is a dialogue here, but also we have some dialogue here. So I'm Bill Pink, honored to serve as president of Ferris State University, and honored also to be on a campus that that houses the Jim Crow Museum, and a campus that sponsors the exhibit that hopefully all of you have seen here in this facility. I'd like to also say thank you to Dale and to his staff here at the Public Museum. You can't get very many good things done without partnership. I'm a firm believer in that. And Dale, thank you for the partnership. It means a lot to our institution, it means a lot to all those who've come through here. So thank you for that. I would also say thank you to Dr. Pilgrim. To have an individual like Dr. Pilgrim, not only a part of the university, not only a part of my leadership team, but also just being the stalwart that he is when it comes to this museum, and not just the museum, but the whole message and the whole aim, if you will, behind the museum. It's what he lives his professional life for. And so a big thank you to him as well. And then the last thing I'll say is why, to answer that why. The way I would answer why I'm part of this panel, said yes, actually dates back over 130 years ago, my why. Because over 130 years ago, our founder, Woodbridge Ferris, decided that there needed to be an institution in Michigan that could be home to anyone who wanted to come. And it did not matter what color their skin was. Did not matter anything about their gender. None of that mattered. What he wanted was education for everyone in the state of Michigan. And that word, everyone, is a big word. And so the reason why I am happy to serve on a panel like this is because of the first president of Ferris State. Because of him and what he meant. And if I am not, as number 19, able to grab that mantle, grab that baton, and keep running, I'm not the right person for this job. So it's an honor to be able to serve on a panel like this, and I'm looking forward to it with awesome people here on the stage.
So we have an understanding. I never follow him, ever. I just don't do it, unless I have to. But you now have that honor. And so
I was
maybe you
just
could
thinking that. It's like, what a letdown. No, I'm kidding. So greetings, everyone. My name is Shannon Wilson. I have the pleasure of serving as the Vice President of Population Health and Health Equity at Priority Health, a part of the Corewell Health System. In that capacity, I oversee quality for all 1.3 million members that we have. I also oversee our population health and our health equity strategies. In the health equity part of my role is really what makes me passionate about this work. Through the trajectory of my career, I have worked in many places that look at the intersection of race and health and how the work that happens in community, the racial interactions that we have, how they interact with our genes and create health reactions. And so very passionate about the space, very honored to sit on this committee. I'm not going to talk long because I will never be Dr. Pink. But very honored to be in the space. Absolutely love my colleagues at Ferris. I call them colleagues even though I don't work there. But love the Ferris team and everything that's going on up there. Am a huge fan of Dr. Pilgrim and the museum. I think that the museum allows us to inspire questions, creativity, and thought. And we really want to start having conversations in community. And that will lead to a lot of healing that this nation needs. And so for me, it is a really special opportunity to have those conversations with you and be a part of the change. Thanks.
Yeah, and I want this to be a conversation. I know it's just supposed to be doing introductions here, but feel free to interject with others. And so I'm going to start that out by saying we went to a fundraiser for the Holocaust Museum in Detroit. And one of the messages there was that remembrance is an early step in healing, which is the opposite of what dissenters say. They're like, if you remember, you're trying for us not to heal. No. In order to get to healing, we have to remember, you know. Cyndi, go ahead.
Lucky last. Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Cyndi Tiedt. I'm the collections manager at the Jim Crow Museum. So my role really entails looking after the collection of artifacts that we have in the permanent collection. We have around 30,000 objects, the documentation, the preservation, and the digitization of those. And I was very excited when Dr. Pilgrim asked me to be part of this panel because I guess, unlike some others, I've seen the inside, the behind the scenes of what it took to develop this exhibit and really take the learnings that we had from our permanent facility in Big Rapids and share that work and really, as Shannon mentions, cultivating those dialogues and discussions.
So we'll start the second question with you. Because your perspective is probably a little different because you helped create it. When you first saw, now not when we were getting stuff out of crates and everything, but when you first saw the exhibit up, I remember one of the things you pulled me over to the side and you said, so what do you think? You know, so I'm asking you that question. When you walk over there after more than a year of arguing with exhibitors and thank you to Howard Reeves for helping us design and build the exhibit. But what did you experience when you saw it?
I was very proud of the work that our team did. I think, you and I know that we put a lot of effort behind the scenes, but really the whole time we were working on the design, we were thinking about what the audience wants. Not only what do they want, but what do they need? What does this society need? So all of those kind of bigger decisions filter down into what objects we selected, the color of the exhibit, the fonts we use. It was everything that you see was very intentional. And I'm extremely proud of what our team accomplished and what Ferris can now, it speaks to the reputation of Ferris State University as well. So I think it's great. I still get chills every time I go in there. It's something different to see it on paper and then see it in real life.
I should have asked you this before. This is me being a very bad facilitator. How do you prefer to be addressed?
Shannon.
You prefer Shannon? Mm-hmm. So I don't have to call you like Grand Poobah or boss or my supervisor. I don't have to do any of that stuff with you? All right. So Shannon, what did you think when you saw it?
Oh, I think it's amazing. One of the things that I think is so great about this collection is that you can see it in Big Rapids. Mm-hmm. You can see it here. I can go to Big Rapids again and I learn something new. I see something again for the first time, and it just opens your eyes, or you may look at it a different way. One of the things I also appreciate is the dialogue that you get to have with other patrons as they're going through it and getting their perspective, right? And hearing the conversations. And that has been one of the beautiful parts about this exhibit, is really the reaction of others who are going through it as you're going through it as well. But superb job. I think the sheer, the exhibit, but the artifacts that are there are just second to none. And so eye-opening, things that, at this point, I'd like to think we were past some things, but the years that span as you go through the exhibit, I think is one of the other things that just, you have to take it in. And I don't know about you guys, but I always have to pause after I finish and spend some quiet time reflecting and saying, okay, what did this do for me? But fantastic job.
So we had a media day, and we told the media people we don't want certain pictures shown because we don't want to sensationalize this. And if you just show a picture, it's going to be taken out of context. And one of those pictures was a game. It was a picture of a game where people are throwing at black children. And it's probably, in some ways, the most disturbing piece in there. And it makes me think about your work, and I'll tell you why I say that. You ask yourself the question, how is it that a human could take a baseball and throw it and hit another human in the face for entertainment? Well, you have to rationalize that act. And so one of the ways you rationalize it is by saying, I'm not really hurting them. They don't experience pain in the same way. Their pain, see where I'm going with this? Their pain tolerance is different. And so it's okay that I hurt him to entertain myself. Now skip ahead 40, 50, 60, 70, 80 years, and there's still a sizable minority of people working in healthcare who believe that black and brown people don't experience pain in the same way. And so that's why we say that even though America is more democratic and egalitarian than it's ever been, we still live in the ashes, the residue of Jim Crow.
Yes, and I can agree with that. There's a certain, like you alluded to, there is this underlying assumption that has been passed on, even if it's not intentionally passed on, that allows you to think that pain tolerance could be different. And so when, and we still see this, an African American can present for, we see it a lot in maternal issues. So when a mom's having a baby, the African American maternal mortality rate is more than double that of the white rate. And a lot of times a mom can complain about pain or something to that effect, and they'll say it's a part of the process as opposed to having the conversation to really dig deeper. And so a lot of that could be embedded in how we perceive things and how that's been passed on generationally.
Absolutely. And I speak for a certain percentage of African Americans when I say, I want the extra shot. I don't even want just the regular shot. I want all you got. And I can bring my own. I shouldn't say that. I take that back. Is this being recorded here? It's not being recorded. But you get my point is that those beliefs have real life today consequences for people. So Dr. Pink, when you went in, I'm very curious because you helped make this happen. And you didn't know if what you were going to see was going to meet your standards. You didn't know if, you went in like everybody else, hoping it was good. And so what was your experience when you saw it?
Several things. So number one, highly impressed with the exhibit. And you will know this story, Dr. Pilgrim will relate to this because for so long, and I'll talk about something I'm sure you may even cover it, you see in the title of the exhibit, Overcoming Hateful Things. And that was, for me, that was one of the things that first stood out to me was seeing that word overcoming because we went back and forth with the title. And one of the first things I noticed was that label of overcoming hurtful things because I feel like that title truly gets at what you talk about so much in terms of what the aim and the goal, one of the goals of the museum is, which is the idea of showing people not only in incredibly oppressive situations, but showing a people overcoming, showing pushback. And so I felt like when I saw that to begin with, I thought, you know what, that is such a strong statement for a person before they even get in there, before you even walk in the room, to see that, okay, this isn't going to be just about hateful things. It's going to be about people overcoming.
Yes.
So the other thing that I appreciate about it, and I resonate so strongly with what Shannon was saying about the kind of toggling between this version of the museum and what's in Big Rapids. Because if you haven't seen both, I honestly believe that when you've seen both, it really does something as you're individualizing it as well. Because for me, one of the most impactful to me personally images in the Big Rapids Museum is one of the first ones coming in, where as you get a little bit deeper, honestly, you see the African-American man who is on the whipping post in the middle of town with all the people there dressed to the nines watching this happen. And when I see that and start contextualizing that piece, combined with what we see here, it has this interesting mental marriage, is what I would call it, in how you view both and how you view the whole thing. Because when you see both museums, for me at least, when I see both, I keep coming back to the term overcoming. And so I think as the story, and I believe that's what the museum does, it tells a story. As the story progresses, as you walk through, the story continues, but you always have in mind what you read when you first walked in the door, overcoming. And to me, that was and still remains really helpful.
Okay. So it's built as a traveling exhibit, but it feels like a little museum. Okay. And again, thank you to the Grand Rapids Public Museum for being gracious hosts, helpful hosts, collaborative hosts. What we've noticed from even the beginning of the process, especially in the museum world, but not just in the museum world, is a fear or something close to fear that people have with the exhibit. Now, for the people that come or watch the video, whatever, they can see this is not the boogeyman, but there is this fear So where do you think, and we'll start on this end this time, where do you think that at least hesitancy, if not fear, comes from of an exhibit like that?
I think several things. I think number one, we sometimes misinterpret the purpose of it. And the purpose of the museum, in a word, educate. Let's just stay with one word on that. We're a higher ed institution. We are the university. If you can't have those conversations at a university when it comes to the public domain, where can you have them, right? Hopefully you private domain, there are other places. But with one piece there, I believe there's a recalibration of the mind that needs to happen to think about it from a perspective of education, more so than, so if I can start there, so number one. I think number two, and I think this is for anyone who walks in, no matter what color your skin is. I think part of that fear, hesitation, might not necessarily reside in the fact that me and my present being, my present state, I may not either be experiencing that Jim Crow level of oppression or may not be dishing out that level, but who do I know is? Or who do I know did? And when I see things from my perspective, I see things that my mother and dad used to tell me about. Now I see it in a museum. They are long gone from this earth. But those are things that they experienced. They were in Jim Crow era. My father was in World War II. And so many of the things that I see in there, part of my pain is knowing that's what my parents experienced. And that's not pleasant.
Okay.
But for others, it may be, in some cases, did we have anything to do with that? And I think part of that is part of that fear.
Okay.
And I think it's a really interesting dissonance that happens there.
Okay. Shannon?
I think a lot of it is rooted in perceived guilt or blame for the actions that are visible in the museum or in the exhibit. And I think Dr. Pink is spot on in that the real intent of the exhibit is to educate and not to incite guilt or blame, right? And so I think that is that fear that keeps people from coming in the door when really we want to educate and heal and move on. And it really should be a very positive experience, as positive as that experience can be. But, thinking through, like, this is a part of the healing process. This is a part of the process to get to the next step. And a necessary part of the process, that acknowledgement, that understanding of root causes, if you will. And so I think a lot of what's in the museum are some of the root causes for things that are still going on today, and being able to have some of those conversations. But I think a lot of it starts with the guilt and the blame.
And I think that's why it's important that even though we have the name Jim Crow, that we also have objects that are made last week or 2 weeks ago. In part because it shows you how those things morph into the present. Again, don't get it twisted. We're not saying America's not better, right? But what we are saying is that if you look closely, you'll see some of the residue in contemporary attitudes, tastes, behaviors, and objects. And so we're not done yet, is sort of the thing.
I think one of the things, at least for me, that always strikes me in some of the more contemporary pieces that you've collected is there's one thing to be hateful, but there's still the racial undertones within the hate, which lets you know that you have not moved beyond where we were so long ago. And that's the piece where you're like, wow, okay.
So I'm going to ask you the same question, but then I'm going to take it to a place where we go in the museum all the time because we talk about everything.
Okay.
So if you think you're in my head, you can just go ahead and do that, and you don't need me to answer the question. Ask the question. Go ahead.
I think I know what question
Okay.
you're going to, but maybe you should say it just in case.
Well, let's start.
Start.
You threw me off. That pause was awkward, so that was. I've heard people suggest sometimes that only black people should work in the museum, which just blows my mind because it's race relations,
Yes.
right? And anyone, irrespective of their racial or ethnic background, can do good, solid research and can present the facts. Okay. So you've also carried, you and Lisa Kim as the museum assistant and some others who've worked with the museum, carried that extra sort of, I don't want to use the term baggage, but that extra dimension. All right. So I don't know if you want to deal with that or not.
So let me start with your first question, why people may be apprehensive to come in. I think as Americans, we are uncomfortable with the concept of race and race relations. So I think for a lot of people, that apprehension to come to an exhibit like this or come to our museum is based on that fear, whether it's a fear of guilt, whether it's a fear of seeing other people's hurt, like you mentioned, Dr. Pink. But at the museum, we promote dialogue. We talk about racism and race relations every day. It's okay to be uncomfortable. I think for me, it means that you're pushing yourself, you're challenging yourself, and maybe you're unlearning a lot of the perspectives that you were told growing up. And then to add that other element into it, as a white person working at the museum, there is some negative feedback about that. But as you mentioned, it's a dialogue, it's a relationship. I think this work is so needed that everyone can contribute. I know for myself personally, I am very careful about listening to people's lived experiences, knowing that there are just some things in this world that I won't experience myself. But I need to learn from that and listen, and that we can all play a part in healing this world. And Shannon, I liked how you mentioned understand and heal, because it's actually our new little tagline, witness, understand and heal. And I think that really
I didn't do that intentionally.
I think just that learning, that education, but doing it for the purpose of healing, whether it's ourselves or society as a whole, is so important. And I think everyone can play a part in that. My part is working with the objects, working at events such as this, but really listening to people's experiences and having that dialogue every single day.
Oh, we're at that part of the program. Go ahead. No, you could. When I said interject, I meant the people up here, but it's okay. It's okay that we do the audience now. Go ahead.
When someone comes into the museum, and I brought lots of people in, I walk in, and I think a lot of people, especially if you've grown up in a white society, some people have never seen black people. And people who have seen it, then you come into, did I say something like that? And the apprehension is turning on yourself and thinking about all these things you've experienced in your life, and having been in high school and kissed a black girl and got beaten up by everybody, both sides, you look at things differently. And then you have this, for some people, the fear. Did we do that? And that becomes a barrier sometimes. And then the healing process comes through. And some people hate it all, they'll come through. But the ones that really, really hate, don't go there. We're trying to get the people that have the uncomfortableness to change that viewpoint. Getting those people into the museum is part of why we're here, because we've taken it out of Ferris and brought it into the big city, and we start to disseminate that information and change things.
Okay. Chuck and Ward have been two of our most long-term supporters given lots of objects to the museum. Vice News did a special on the museum years ago, which has over 20 million views, and they were featured in that exhibit. So we've loved working with the both of you, and appreciate, that help. So I don't know if I say that enough. I want to kind of segue in a different, and I don't do segues well.
I know.
Just, it's like people talking to me, it's like running on the side of a train. You know what I mean? They're trying to get on the train. Grand Rapids, like any city, has its share of racial tension and the like. What are the conversations that, if it's not the tools we have, what are the conversations that some tools should be used to address in this area? I don't know. I'll let any one of you start that wants to start.
Ask that again.
All right, so there is racial strain in this city. We want to help, and our approach is unconventional. It's using objects of intolerance to stimulate discussions. I think that can work here. I think it's already started working. But the end result of whatever the tool is a set of conversations. And so what are the conversations we need to be having in this city, in this county?
Yeah, I think having been in West Michigan here now just 8 years, as far as my family and I are concerned, and having been involved in a lot of these conversations in this city, there have been several just in the last 8 years of, and honestly, there are efforts to say, how can we do better? One of the things that I continually see that efforts have run into here, just personal opinion here, I think in so many ways, especially when we've worked with city government, I've worked with companies, businesses, education, all throughout Kent County. And what I have always found, and I shouldn't say always, and many times have found, is that when the onion continued to be peeled back, when the scope of the issue really became shed of light, it gets so big and clunky of how you address it that you do what I call paralysis. I talk about that a lot. You see so much that it paralyzes you and you end up doing nothing. Or it's so big, let's take this piece. And if we can do something with here, then we're going to claim victory. I understand. But the reason why it's this big is because it didn't take 6 weeks for us to get this big. So it's not going to take us 6 weeks to address it. And so with these type of conversations and this kind of work, that's one of the things I think is powerful about the museum. The museum is committed to time. We'll do this. Okay, let's do it. We'll do this as long as we need to. It would be nice if all these artifacts, that we were at a place where you get one of these and you just get rid of it, burn it, or whatever. But what we have seen is the notion of how you get that to help remind and educate so that folks understand, and so that one day we do want to get to where our founder and his wife would talk about and truly making the world a better place.
Okay. Shannon, how long have you been in this area?
12 years.
12 years.
12 years.
So you've looked around in 12 years.
I've looked around a
Yeah,
little
you've
bit.
looked around in 12 years. So how would you answer that? What are those conversations?
I don't know if I can tell you what conversations need to happen. I think what I would say is a couple of things. One, I agree with Dr. Pink. How could you not agree with Dr. Pink? But I agree with Dr. Pink. It took us centuries to get to the place where we are, right? Centuries. And so thinking that we can come in and have the conversation overnight and fix it is not realistic. It will take time to unravel what has happened. But the other thing I like is what you said, and you said I authentically listen. And I think we need to get into community, and we need to authentically listen, and to understand, what is hurting, where do we need to fix, and not apply Band-Aids, which is what I think oftentimes we go in and do, is that quick fix, but really look at what is the root cause, where are we bleeding, and how do we stop the bleed. Not that I'm the medical person up here, but how do we get to that root cause and really stop the bleed? And that's the piece that I'm so passionate about. One of the reasons I really want to come and have this conversation with you all is because I think this community is ripe for stopping the bleed, and we need to get in and authentically listen so that we can do that.
That's a T-shirt. This community is ripe to stop the bleeding. That's a T-shirt. I'm going to trademark that. That's awesome.
All yours.
Yeah. Probably will sell 3. You know what I mean? Just none of my ideas ever paying out. With
Maybe
these
I
things,
bought
right?
them all. Is that what you're saying? Okay.
Yeah. So every night when we go to sleep, I live in Rockford. Cyndi lives out of town, and you live out of the town now, and you live around here. But every night when we go to sleep with the knowledge that there's a, quote, bad side of town. And that's another bad side of town. And that's another bad. And the fact that we go to sleep means that in our brains, we've made peace with that. Right? I mean, this is a community with great wealth. I mean, just outstanding wealth, no matter how you measure it. But there are extremes in this city that are just mind-boggling, sometimes only a block or 2 away. And it's not like in some nations where these folks don't know how these folks are living. They live a block away. And then when it comes to race, I don't think I've ever been in a city with more, I don't mean this disrespectfully, I'm making an observation. I don't think I've ever been in a city with more people doing DEI work and more people getting awards for civil rights work. Can I say that out loud in here?
Yeah.
I don't think I've traveled. You know what I'm saying? I'm from Pritchard, Alabama, but we had a car. I have traveled around. I don't think I've ever been in a community with more people who actively are involved in the organization or, to do good work, right? Which is great. And yet, as a community, you have people afraid to talk about race, afraid to be called a bigot, afraid that they're going to say the wrong thing. And now, that's easy for me to say for a couple reasons. One, when you come to the Jim Crow Museum, and Cyndi will vouch for this, Lisa, others, Franklin will vouch for this, we have an advantage because everybody who goes in there expects to talk about race. So we have that. Listen, that's just an advantage, right? And they expect to talk about it, the raw parts. So we don't have to fancy it up or anything. They know that's what we are. And so that advantage means that we have some of the conversations that we'd love for other people to have. But it's hard to have a conversation when you're afraid someone's going to call you a bigot. It's hard to have a conversation when you're afraid your bigotry is going to show. Right? It's hard to have a conversation when you're not allowed to be wrong. And you can't be wrong, right? Without fear that someone's going to crush you. So I don't know if I set this up well or not in terms of, you don't live in this area, but you certainly meet people from all over. And you see the kinds of, or you have ideas about the kinds of conversations people should be having.
I think the advantage of our work is that, yes, when people come to us, whether it's in the Big Rapids facility or the travelling exhibit, they're there for a reason. They're there to learn, and they probably expect that there will be some discussion about race. And I think the benefit that the museum can, one of the resources that it can give to people to better hold these conversations is having a more thorough understanding of that history. Because like my colleagues have mentioned, we didn't get here in a matter of weeks. We got here over centuries. And the fact that it's really part of this system, it's a systemic form of racism, it's certainly not going to be a Band-Aid fix. So to kind of arm yourself with that knowledge, I think is important. And for some people, I know I'm one of these people, I like to be prepared. Maybe having that information will better position them to have the discussions, or to then identify, okay, well, how do we address this? Is it citywide? Is it neighbourhood? Is it just the acts that I do in my daily interactions? You know, there's so many ways to kind of put your own mark on this and start the work. And I think the museum, in many ways, is well positioned, not just in this community, but in many communities, to kind of give people that foundational knowledge and understand, how did we get here? And not only how did we get here, but how are my friends and family still, what are they experiencing that I'm not seeing or I'm not understanding the history behind? I think that's really important.
Yeah, you've heard me say before, I think Americans like happy history. The kind of history you could celebrate in parades and smug conversations. And I hear people say all the time, like, why do we keep talking about the past? Every holiday is the celebration of the past. I mean, and it's like the big parade. I'm like, oh, you mean, why are we talking about those parts of the past? Well, if you're going to be a mature nation, that's part of it. The purpose of studying the past is not to make us feel good or bad. It's so we have an accurate understanding of what happened. And hopefully, so we do better, right? So let me ask you this: you've done a lot of tours. Are you hopeful for the area, for the nation? I mean, you get all these TV shows and listen to these people. Are you hopeful?
I am. I think we've fallen a bit, maybe gone backwards a little. But I think people are willing to learn and do the work. I think that the struggle, at least for some of us, is what does that work look like? What's the next step? And I know for a lot of people who come to the museum, they're there to learn about the history, looking at the primary source objects that we have. But then when they leave, it's like, well, what's next? Now what do I do with that? So I am hopeful. I think that particularly with the younger generation, I see that they're willing and ready to do a lot of the work. I just think that there needs to be some clearer action steps to do that. It's not going to be a quick fix like we've been saying, but yeah, I am hopeful. We need to improve. We need to do better.
Okay. Shannon, are you hopeful?
Yes, I'm always hopeful. I think we've probably politicized race and racism too much as of late, but I'm extremely hopeful that when my two younger daughters are my age, that they will live in a very different society, and that we will learn from our mistakes and move forward in a very positive way.
That puts pressure on you to be hopeful.
I think it's hard. For me, it's hard not to be hopeful. That doesn't mean that I don't find days I'm discouraged, though. That's life. There are those days. The very fact that I am president at Ferris State University says we've come a ways, right? I mean, for an African American man to be a president at a public university in rural Michigan, that says progress. That says that we've done some things since Jim Crow. But what we can't do, we can't do what you do in golf way too much, Dr. Pilgrim. Here's what you do in golf. You get within 8 feet of the cup and you pick it up and say, that's done. That's a gimme. You have done so well to get within 8 feet, but the job isn't over yet. But it's easy to pick it up and say it's done. Now, I do that too. But that's the same thing. You know, that's something that's easy to do because I still have 8 feet left, but surely, since I came from 400 yards away to 8 feet, surely we could just say done. Mm-hmm. But there's still 8 feet left to go. Mm-hmm. And if all we do is pick up and say, that's it, well, there's all kinds of terrain in those 8 feet. I mean, it undulates. Mm. There's dots. There's crevices. Mm-hmm. And if we just assume that it would happen, it could be that maybe, just maybe, Dr. Pilgrim, I may have missed that. Mm-hmm. So we have got to do the same thing. We can't, at this point, just because we've come 400 yards, we can't just pick up and think it's done. We have to finish out the hole.
So back to T-shirts. Justice is not a gimme. Mm. Isn't that a good one?
That is.
Yeah, justice is not a gimme. I mean, I'm going to make that put. You know what I'm saying? So I might as well pick it up. But justice is not a gimme. I like that. So when I was growing up in Alabama, I was a huge Dr. King person, also Malcolm X. And actually, if you were a young African American, you had to say you liked Malcolm X more than Martin Luther King because, you know, if you get my point, right? He was more radical. He was more in your face, by any means necessary, all that stuff, right? And I think I accepted almost everything Dr. King said without thinking about it. It was just, and one of those, the spirit behind a lot of his sayings was that we're just always moving toward a more just society. It may be incremental and imperceptible, but we're all, if we do the work, if we're active, if you know, we'll just eventually get there. That was this hopefulness in Dr. King. And I think I just accepted that without ever really thinking about it, even though the life of an activist is the life of failure. Don't ever forget that. And that's why we should celebrate the victories that we do get. And so here I am growing older and still having this idea somewhere in my essence that things are just going to always keep, again, they'll be slow sometimes, but they'll always be moving forward. And then about 8 or 10 years ago, I started hearing national politicians saying stuff that reminded me of when I was growing up in Alabama. Mm-hmm. As the kind of racial rhetoric that I thought was gone. Of course, I'm watching this Montgomery fight the other day, and I'm thinking, Alabama never fails to make me proud. You know what I mean? My home state, they don't miss an opportunity to make me proud. So I kind of got a little discouraged. Mm-hmm. You know, I kind of got a little discouraged. And then after George Floyd was murdered, watching the young people in the streets, I'm not talking about the ones, you know, misbehaving. I'm talking about the ones protesting the way we protest, right? With passion. And I just realized these young folks, they ain't having it. You know what I'm saying, Shannon? They ain't having it. They are out there, I mean, black ones and white ones and red ones and yellow ones and brown ones and tall ones and short ones and straight ones and gay ones and religious ones and not religious. They were out there protesting, and they were sending the message that we ain't going back to that, right? And that renewed me. And so in that sense, I'm hopeful. In that sense, I'm hopeful. All right, so what we want to do, what we tried to do today was to have a conversation that you kind of like overheard. But now I want to invite you to become part of that conversation. For those of you who could wait. Go ahead.
I just had a question. Do you feel as a society there is an age limit to go into the exhibit, right? And I'm just kind of curious of what's that?
She needs a microphone. Is that one working right there? Okay. Oh. Well, it doesn't, that one, okay.
I'm usually louder.
That's okay. That's all right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just curious. There's an age limit to go into the exhibit. And I was just curious, as a society, if that race itself or these discussions, how do we interpret an age group to go into this exhibit? Because like if I were to take a child into like the Egyptian exhibit and some kid just freaked the hell out, like, oh my God, they assimilate the organs all along, they were scarred for life. How in society is that it's come to where we have to put an age on this particular subject? Just curious.
All right, well, I have an answer for myself, but in terms of the age appropriateness of dealing with race in a head-on kind of way, what are your go ahead.
I want you to talk about, because we've talked about this before, and what your view is as far as, I think what you've shared is helpful. I think.
Yeah, I think people should talk about race as soon as they understand words, but that doesn't mean they should see something as harsh as that. So it has to be, we have to make sure that they can benefit from it. We've struggled with this as a museum. I mean, I'm looking at Franklin over here and Lisa, they argue about this all the time, about whether or not a small child should come in or not. So we have one of them saying, well, the parent should have the responsibility of having had previous discussions and whatever else. And then you have the other person saying, yeah, but a lot of times the parents didn't have those conversations, and so now the child is just being thrust into that whole piece. I think the value of the museum, I must flip that around a little bit. The value of the museum, including the travel museum, is that we have the question. It's that the difficult questions, like I asked Cyndi, well, she's heard me ask that question 1,000 times, so it's not difficult to her, but I asked her a, quote, difficult question earlier. That's what we do, right? We want to know, we want to create a space where people are safe to disagree, so that one person can say, I think that's too much for a, and by the way, I'm kind of one of those people, I think that's too much for a person who's 10. And someone else to say, oh, no. A 10-year-old in this culture needs to be having those discussions. So again, the part of the value is to disagree, creating a space where we can disagree and we can chat and explain to one another. And here's something radical, where we can listen to the 10-year-olds say. Because quite frankly, there's some things that they're watching that shock me.
That part.
And I'm like, oh my. So we had an 8th grade, I think it was the Catholic school in Big Rapids. Years ago, when we were in this little tiny room, they wanted to bring, they were 8th graders. And the teachers came to us. And so I said, well, and we were in a really tiny room. I said, so what would make me more comfortable is if the parents and the teachers came first, so that you not just, being ill-informed. And so, I'll never forget this. So the parents and teachers came, and they're like, oh, this part's not bad, this is not bad. And then there was a part that shows some partial nudity. Although not as much as you'd find on beaches, but, and the teachers and the parents were like, oh no, this is obscene. And so the devil told me to say, what the hell is not obscene in here? This whole thing is obscene. You have a really, really, really narrow definition of obscenity. Because for me, all those things are obscene, right? So that's not answering the question, except to say that, again, I believe we should have intelligent conversations with children as soon as they're able to have them. And then in a thoughtful way, we should decide what to introduce into their lives. And I think the museum probably comes a little bit after a bunch of other things have happened. And we're going to struggle with this, though, because when we move into the next facility, we're going to have a policy.
Yeah.
And quite frankly, what do you guys do here?
I believe we implemented our policy
Okay.
age 12, is that correct, Steph?
Okay.
And we use, and it's very important to have that. Parents were really appreciative. People going through, some people decided that
maybe a spouse would go through first,
Yeah.
and they were in other parts of the museum. But with our other exhibits, like Bodies Reveal, very graphic, physiological stuff, that policy is very, very helpful because parents don't want to be surprised.
Yeah.
They may perceive it to be one thing, and then they get in there and it's something else. So they were very appreciative, and some actually took their kids through it and would stop and explain things, allow them to ask questions. I was surprised how many parents did, even though their kids were underage. They did take their kids through it. But Stephanie, was that our policy, Steph?
Yeah, it's a recommended age 12 and above with a parent or guardian. So any youth, we recommend that a parent or guardian's with them so they could have those meaningful conversations because the parents know best what they've already been exposed to or not.
So what's our policy at the museum? Is it?
We're saying basically the same thing.
Okay.
So I think probably Dr. Pill probably remembers that was one of the first questions I asked when I first made it to Ferris when I saw the museum, because when you put on just the hat of being president of a public entity like this, you just have to make sure you're careful as to what those parameters are, and to have established parameters so that you're able to say, here's what we do, and that's it just puts on that hat of protection of the organization at the end of the day.
Teacher.
Yeah. Especially today.
Yeah, I guess to build on that, I mean, I was thinking of when I went in there, I did find it very accessible, and I found it, and I don't know what this says about my background, it seemed subtle, and it seemed subtle maybe because maybe that's the way it was designed, or maybe it's, that I've read and researched so much, but I also found that the questions that were coming to me from the young man when we were walking through there made me have to step up my game and really give thought. And so I think when we talk about ages, maybe it's not just the age of the kid, but also that parents are also said, hey, if you bring your kid in here, you have to be ready to step up your game and be ready to answer some questions that might be challenging for you, and you may not know the answers. You might have to say, wow, I'm not really sure about that, or I have to think about that one, or wow, some of the stuff that is happening is I didn't always notice it was happening either. I didn't always see it. And one of the books I studied years ago, which I thought was really helpful, is by Andre Lopez. It was called Pagans in Our Midst. And it was about racism in literature, or not just in literature, but in journalism, actually. And it really worked with a lot of indigenous peoples and indigenous peoples in this country, and how it just became commonplace to use certain terms that were, looking back, were derogatory and racist, but they didn't necessarily seem that way, or they weren't called that at the time. And it had some other, so that, I mean, I think that, and I think I saw that in the exhibit, that there's stuff that at the time we don't always see or recognize, and then you have to wonder, and this would be a question to the panel right now, like what is going on in our newspapers, in our literature, in our journalism that is perpetuating racist themes?
Well, I mean, that's really broad. What I would have to do is, and I am curious about this, again, I'm, grew up in Alabama, I'm looking at the different ways that the various outlets cover what happened in Montgomery. So one of the things I noticed was that videotape, or the tapes, cover X number of minutes, but depending on the desire of the publisher or editors or whatever, they pick the tape up at certain times in it. And so I'm if you're a sociologist, you just pay attention to things like that, and then you ask the question, so what's the consequence if I only see the last minute and a half? What's the consequence if I only see the first minute and a half? that kind of thing. So,
You know, and the other thing is to answer that, as far as media, especially, what's one person's reporting the news is another person's discriminatory story, right? Mm-hmm. And so we have so many definitions when it comes to media as to what that is, where one outlet will say and do X, and everyone's going, what are you thinking? And the other is going, well. So there's such a spectrum and continuum there, it's hard to put a finger on that. And going back also to what was mentioned about ages of folks going through either of the museums. Mm-hmm. When I think about this museum here, the importance of having someone helping a child understand what they're viewing. A 10-year-old may see that Ku Klux Klan uniform and think that's going to be a Halloween costume this coming Halloween. You know, that's what I'm going to have. If they do not understand what that is, right? And so it is imperative that we are explaining, well, here's what you're looking at. And we have to be careful also that we do not get wrapped up in leaving information out of our explanation that we have in our head, but may not be in that child's head, right? So it's that danger that we have as educators to assume you know so much. So I don't start at the beginning, I start here, because surely you know this much. 10-year-old, it doesn't even have this, right? And so making sure that as we see those, as we show those things, and for some kids, they're going to read halfway through the write-up in there and then give up because I don't know what that, you know, what does that mean? So, you know, and so it is imperative that we are, it's that implication of the reason why we have to make sure we are being so thorough if we're going to have someone walk through there whose learning curve is a whole lot wider than ours. Mm-hmm. And that's why having, you know, with the children, you know, I look at our museum here, I think it's amazing. Pink Opinion, I call this our PG-13 version of what's in Big Rapids. Yeah, that's what. Yeah, that I would agree with you there.
So we're going to take about another 5 minutes, which will give us an opportunity for maybe 2 more questions. Yes.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I am so glad that this exhibit is here. As far as the age thing, I grew up in the city of Chicago when Emmett Till was murdered. Mm. My mother took me to his funeral when I was about 6 years old. Wow. And when we were in line, people were asking my mother, why are you bringing your children? My mother said, because I want them to see the truth. Mm-hmm. And when I was in 3rd grade, I had a teacher throw an eraser at me and my girlfriend. Yes, we were talking in class. And she pointed at me and her. I don't even know what subject we were in class, but she pointed to me and she said, you think that you people are accidentally left out of history. She says, no, it is deliberate because a people without a history is a people without power.
Wow.
Now, going to Emmett Till's funeral still rides with me today. My mother grew up in Birmingham, Alabama, that they finally called Birmingham. Mm-hmm. And I was also with the other guy, I can't think of his name, you called him, that my mother loved Martin Luther King, but I loved the other one. Malcolm X. Mm-hmm. And I was upset with my mother. I said, that's what's wrong. We always want to go along with that, you know, let's just go out and kick their butts. And my mother said to me, you don't understand. You have to be who you are, not what somebody say you are. Now, as far as being on TV, you got to listen. Journalists will tell you a story, but you have to listen at their choice of words. There was a riot in Watts. There was a rebellion in Mexico. There was an uprising in Nevada and a disturbance in San Francisco. Who are they talking about? Blacks riot, Hispanics rebel, indigenous people uprise, and white folks have disturbances. So you have to educate yourself to understand what and how people are treating you. Now, look at this room. Look at this room. The ratio of people here are non-whites. Why? And I appreciate people coming because how do you learn? You have to expose yourself to the good and the bad. I'm also an ex-X-ray technician. I trained at Cook County and I worked at San Francisco General. Yes, black people, we got more radiation. Zap it up because you got to get through that black skin. And these are things that if you're not part of, you don't understand. Ignorance is not bliss. Education is power. And it's for everybody to expose yourself to what is the truth, not what somebody tell you is the truth. So growing up in the city of Chicago, I was there doing race riots. I grew up on the south side and the west side. I grew up in the projects. I'm a black Catholic. That's a war all in itself. So it's you have to be who you are, not what you are. And that's where I try to explain to people of don't let somebody identify who you are.
Thank you. Yeah. So that we have time for one more, but that reminds me, in the new facility, we're going to show much more. You got a taste of it next door, but much more African Americans pushing back with their activism, with their achievements, and with people just living their lives with dignity. So I don't want to lose sight of that. And the second thing is that we're going to have a booth in there where people can tell stories and we can capture their stories, because most people don't write books. Most people don't write songs or poetry. And so when they die, they take their stories with them. And so we want to capture everybody's stories in that new facility. So we have a chance for one more question. Yes.
I want to start off to say thank you. That was a very good exhibit, educational. This was a last-minute thing for me to come, and I'm happy I came.
Good.
One thing I didn't do and I'm not happy with, I didn't remember everybody's name on the panel, but I do remember the president of Ferris. That's what he does. You talked about 8 feet, the last 8 feet. Can you, I'm assuming there's, in that 8 feet, there's the goal of getting in the hole. Can you kind of talk about that and how to get there? Or if any one of them, up on the panel wants to, chime in.
Yeah, so when I think about, so I'm going to put myself, when I think about when I'm playing golf, and I've got that 8-foot putt left, it is, if I'm really trying to bring it home, it is looking at it, it's actually getting pretty low to see what the terrain is between, because that's going to affect the putt. For me, I'm a horrible person when it comes to reading putts. So I'm usually going to ask the person standing next to me, what do you see it doing? Because I'm horrible at it. But I am a believer that whenever it comes to completing a task, that's why I said about partnership, I think you got to bring as many muscle fibers to the conversation as possible to complete the task. In this case, not only reading and vision, but as many muscle fibers. What do you think it's going to do? Because as we do that, and then it might be that first go at it may leave it a couple of inches short. but we still got to complete it. The whole idea is not seeing that the job isn't done, knowing that we haven't completed, we're not where we want to be, but let's just pick it up and go on to the next hole. Because when I pick it up and go to the next hole, he looks at me and says, Ping, you weren't going to make that putt. You can't hit that putt. And he's probably right. And so what it means is that we have to complete. And we can't just, and I happen to be a person, this is a journey. I mean, it is such a journey, this whole thing. And journeys are full of fits and starts, stops and starts, things that set us back, things that push us forward. That's all I've seen all 50 plus years of my life. I often say that if my dad walked in that door right now, my dad's been dead he passed away about 20 years ago. But if he walked through that door right now and he heard our conversation, after I walked down, he'd catch me and say, you mean you guys are still struggling with that? You mean you still haven't been able to do the thing? Because when I was a little boy, he told me one day that all be over with. He said, in your lifetime, you won't have to worry about this anymore. We still have 8 feet left.
So I want to thank our panelists. Will you give them a hand, please? And then I want to thank each of you, and I would not be me if I didn't say that you've been watching images, a few images of the museum that we're building in Big Rapids. I watched a lot of you as you walk in. Some of you smell of great money. And those of you that don't smell as strong of great money, you know some people who reek of money. And so, but beyond money to help us with the campaign, I hope we've convinced you today to help us champion the work that we're doing. It's not the only work. It's certainly not the most conventional work, but it is work that we've seen work. And President Reagan used to talk about that city on the top of the hill. You know, I actually think we'll get there, not in my lifetime, but I think we'll certainly get closer there. And we get there with your help. So thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.